Interrogation. Interrogation. There's there are two poems that I feel actually approach art. Out of everything I've written, there's only a couple pieces I think actually approach art where even if they're not finished, they just need to be polished. Amnesty, that story with the Mexicans crossing the border that I had to hurry up the second video. I was reading it too slow and I wasn't going to make the cutoff. But that one, if it doesn't make a short story, and if it's not a complete short story and I can't turn it into a novel, I'll turn it into a play. But there's something there that I keep coming back to. I really like the characters. Decibels in the War Dead, which I read recently, which started me writing again. So that one has so much emotion, and I really like the metaphor. And if that one isn't a real essay, or if it can't sell it or turn it into something, I wrote that for me, but I captured something in there and a way to think and a way to analyze things and convey emotion through. It just feels like that's my style. If I have a voice, it's in a creative metaphor of comparing, taking an event or an injustice or something that really feels strong, I feel strongly about, and exploring it in a unique way with a unique metaphor, imagery, and then the other two that I would say, if they're not done, then they just need to be polished, are Interrogation, this one, and one other poem, which we'll get to. So this is Ernest Hemingway syntactic interpretation. So I kept pretty much every line is a line coming from him, different words. So now my mind doesn't have to think so much trying to be a poet. It's a very intimidating thing to do, especially if you feel like eventually you want to earn a place within the canon of human art. I'm taking Hemingway, which is a guy who we supposedly has a permanent place in the canon. I think it's arguable how much these guys actually are good and how much they're just serving our story we tell ourselves. But he wasn't the best poet, and that's acknowledged. And so this makes it a little bit easier for me to imitate him. It'd be, I think, more arrogant. Not that it's not arrogant now, but it'd be more arrogant for me to try to rewrite one of his books. You know what? What did Hemingway write? Steinbeck, I say, would be like a perfect writer. Some writers I actually feel like, I haven't read much Hemingway. Haven't felt the need to. I felt a lot of warmongering and glorification of stuff. I don't know. I use my instincts. My instincts haven't led me towards Hemingway. Steinbeck is definitely a lodestar, a guy on my compass that I look towards. Tortilla Flats, A Mice and Men, Oh Man in the Sea. But Hemingway, not so much. But maybe that's why I decided to imitate some of this stuff, just to be like, how good are you, Hemingway? So this I really like. And it's one of the poems that I would say at like open mic or something, or like I would try to present later on. Interrogation. Now sleeps he with insurgency, who yesterday denied him thrice. Soften him up. Now sleeps he with insurgency, who yesterday denied him thrice. Pause. Wait for the detainee to catch his breath. Continue. Did you deny them? Yes. Thrice? Yes. Soften him up. Do you fight for this old country with the insurgency, with your life? Soften him up. I do. Man Judah Girya Kunan Aber Judah Yar Judah. Translate. I weeping separately, the clouds separately, the friend separately. Repeat after me separately. I do, separately. Continue. It is continued. In the next war we shall interrogate the poets. In the next war we shall interrogate the poets. The Quran shall come packaged in every MRE. The Quran shall come packaged in every MRE. You don't need to repeat this. It's in your SOP. Today, no one tortures because transparency is of the utmost importance. Softening alone is retained, but it is only used as an auxiliary. Tightening the screws is retained. It means that which one must suffer without any permanent or profound psychological damage. Those of us who return talk very slowly, and we look at one another with infinite love and poetry. This comes only after prolonged detention and is one of the final symptoms. There has been irritation, anger, fear, doubt, confessions, denials, misinterpretations, mistakes, cowardice, inability, and lack of talent for drowning. All this has been and will be again to be counterbalanced by firmness, steadiness, courage, honor of family, and the ability to both resist and to fight. But for now, for a moment, there's only love and poetry. Know how to endure, and only love and poetry. Repeat it, only love and poetry. For the Americans too, Man Judah Girdia Kunan Aber Judah Yar Judah. No. Then it is not love, not for the Americans too. And yes, it is love and poetry. How can you write that here? How can you write the other? Not that we ask for more, not that we wish ever any, not that we wish any all, not that we want any greater. But when submerged in that undiscovered country, from whose stream no traveler returns who hasn't been there, we walk away from this we cannot state, and in us died this inner knowing that grows, fresher and lovelier than any rose, manured by death and watered only with unshed tears until, this day, it flowers into this love and this poetry. Not for you. No. I am sorry. Then it is not complete. No, nor will it ever be. There is an occupation, a fucking invading army. Only love and poetry. Reach out your hand to love's dark sister hate, and walk with her into the bowels of Abu Ghraib, and see if love is waiting in the dark, or who is waiting there instead. Did I tell you that my land is a target of opportunity? Love's lovely sister, never wholly wrong, nor more than half right. Love lightly leaves without a trace, and her dark sister fills in all the cells so neatly filled, the communication clear and good, where love's is often quite unintelligible, whispered lightly in a hurry as she smiled, giving unimportance to the words. Do you think there within a cage we'll find her there? No, she's long gone. She never stands for interviews. Knowing too well the idiocy of interrogation, love's always gone, leaving us only the deserted restraints as one finds fastened on the chair in the office of a newly licensed dentist. Now you move slowly, plodding to that room, making feet go slowly where they know better than to take you. Feet are wary, and feet are calm. Feet of the Prophet, and feet of Saddam. Feet know better. Feet won't go. Make feet move on slowly now. Make feet follow where guns lead you ahead, where things are said, toward the place where you'll be wet. Now sleeps he with insurgency who, yesterday, denied him thrice. If you know, you will pay the price. If you do not, you will. You will. You will. But the other will, older than the will of Abraham, the old, long, ugly will that you have faced in all the nights and all the deserts of our hearts, always coming forth like an oasis, always sighting finally the life of the well. Now in this barren cell again, willing to proceed, you wish me no ill will, my true friend, while you expend that which is not expendable, while you violate all that is inviolate, while you destroy that which is indestructible with nothing more than harassing water. Nothing more than that. All my land is a target of opportunity. All of us have been interned, and from this cell, single occupied, its floor covered with dark liquid, many further cells are heard. what does this mean? What does this mean? So, the structure I got from Hemingway, but obviously the meaning I got from my reading about Iraq, including details like newly licensed dentist. Well, this is about torture. This is about waterboarding. This is about, again, um, proud to be an American couch owner is a silly way to put your feet into the shoes of other people who experience American violence. I'm not afraid to be silly as I stretch my creative wings in this couple months. Remember, I'm making money for my folks. We had our blow up. I went to Mexico. My dad and my mom have reconciled and are doing better. I'm making them a little bit of money. So I feel like to be your highest form of artist, you need balance. There's this Greek term for it I read recently that I lost, but the Greeks felt like balance in your life. Be an honorable warrior, prove yourself in battle, as a lover, as a family man, as there was a law once that no public citizen has a duty to shirk from responsibility, to shrink from responsibility, however you say that. But you have a responsibility to be a noble man of integrity, at least back in their society. And if I feel like if you want to create good art, you need to round out your character. So I'm doing these different types of poems, and Hemingway, I'm going through him, just practicing, just stretching my creative wings. But this one is a serious one, and this one I got the theme. It took me a day or two to write this in those coffee shops. So I was working with my folks, going to the coffee shops, reading a bunch. I feel like I have enough knowledge and I have enough lumps in my throat, enough like fire in my chest. I'm like, I need to speak on this. I'm starting to create stuff that later on I want to sell. I have that girl that I'm kind of seeing off and on, so I'm feeling a little bit more confident in my love life. I've stopped putting energy into that addiction bank of that one Addie who is on heroin. I'm starting to learn how to love people while not enabling them, and I think I'm starting to mature out of some destructive patterns or some patterns that weren't healthy. So how I deal with my folks, how I deal with women. A little bit of money in your pocket's never bad for your self-esteem. So, so yeah, I was in a good headspace, and I was able to do something mature, I think. Um, we open up now. Sleeps he with insurgency, who yesterday denied him thrice. This is how poems start, I think, especially if you have a melodic ear, if you love language. It was just lines that come to your head that fit the framework of the Hemingway poem that I'm reading. So I'm like, all right, sleeps he with. So it's very similar. I'd have to look up the Hemingway poem, but very similar language. Obviously not the same words, but the sound. Maybe they might even rhyme with his lines. Um, the basis of this is the basis of military wisdom, that you get more from kindness than violence. When people were torturing in Guantanamo, and they were prosecuted for that, even though George Bush was trying to set up a legal defense not to prosecute these people, and undermine our American values, undermine what our identity is as Americans. It might have been hypocrisy, but at least that hypocrisy was the norm and the culture. Maybe we have a history and culture of violence, but it was a secret history of culture and violence because the norm was supposed to be that we're idealistic and we don't torture. All they've done, all George Bush and the people who follow him, Barack Obama and Trump, have done as align reality with the culture. They've undermined our values of supposedly not torturing, but we've always done that. So it's not like these people have, when we have the narrative that they've destroyed American values or they've undermined who we are. We never were those people, but at least we profess to be those people. I feel like it's a step lower, or maybe it's just maybe it had to happen. We had to come to terms with reality. But that's all they've done is they've made the doctrine in accordance to reality, that the doctrine's torture because we've always been torturing anyways. We were waterboarding people in the Philippines. There's a picture of us waterboarding people on the cover of Time magazine or Life magazine from the Philippines, of white soldiers holding down a brown person pouring water over their face. Back then we were openly, it was a Department of War, not defense. It still is a Department of War, we just call it defense. So apparently the bureaucracies are getting tired of being hypocritical, but it's kind of pulling back the curtain. But you do, in military tactics and strategy, get more from uh, tricking people through kindness than you do from intimidating them through fear. You're not kind to them to be kind. You're kind to them to gather more intelligence. There's a history of intelligence that goes back since the beginning of warfare. Genghis Khan found out many plots through his intelligence network. So did Napoleon. These people who were great commanders and who stayed in power for a long time, a large part of that was because they had great intelligence systems. So like the British Empire as well has always had a good intelligence system. So there's a science to intelligence gathering, and brute force. Maybe violence does have a role to play in that, but the way that we play it out in pop culture with Jack Bauer torturing people, or Spectre, that James Bond movie, or I forgot which one because I don't watch them because they're bullshit, but where like the guy's getting whipped in the nuts or whatever. But pop culture claims that torture has a larger degree of intelligence gathering, a larger role in intelligence gathering than it actually does. And I think I was on the track to be an intelligence professional. I'm not, so I don't want to claim to be, but I was on the track to be. So I have some aptitude for it, even if I have no training. I obviously have some aptitude for that type of profession. And I've met people who also were being trained to be interrogators too. I haven't really talked to them about what they do. I've read about it, but I understand the personality and the aptitude, if not the actual training. And violence does not play as large a role, in my opinion, as it does. Well, not just my opinion. If you read the literature, that's not how you gather intelligence. So this is showing how you can torture people into becoming a part of the insurgency. Now, sleeps he with the insurgency who yesterday denied him thrice. Basically, they're torturing this guy into joining the insurgency. That's another thing. When I read all those notes about Iraq, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 people who they rounded up didn't have intelligence material. They were useless for intelligence gathering purposes. But you had top-down culture from the White House saying, torture these guys, retributive justice. I guess if I look back at these videos, I'm going to find an overall argument, I think, about civilization and how to actually prosecute these war criminals. If civilization is us giving the society the ability to establish justice instead of individuals, our worst leaders are asking our individuals to inflict their own retributive forms of justice. So we're basically, our worst leaders are undermining civilization at its roots from the very top of the chain of command down to the soldiers on the ground. They're encouraging them to take matters into their own hands and not abide by the Geneva Conventions or not torture people and actually just take out their aggression. And that's what you'll find when you get these stories of torture. When I read those notes, a lot of them weren't even for intelligence gathering. They were just for people to exercise their frustrations about 9/11, and then you have that part of it. So top-down culture being established by the chain of command, and then you also have the culture being established by the dominant narratives about Muslim versus Christian. A lot of Christians join the military. It's definitely the strongest religion in there. And so you have all this confusion purposefully being pushed from the top down. And if it's not purposeful, that's a responsibility anyways. So if the culture is rotten, you have to hold the leaders accountable. These are actions that they're performing willingly. So yeah, we're capturing the results of that. Now sleeps he with insurgency who yesterday denied him thrice. Now there's 3 people in this first that I envision in this first section. Pause, wait for the detainee to catch his breath. That's the guy from the outside between the double of the one-way glass. So imagine this interrogation room. You have the guy inside waterboarding, and then you have the person who's being waterboarded, and then the person from the outside who's giving the instructions. From what I've read, that's how it goes down. You have the people doing it, and then the people instructing, whether the people are behind this double pane glass or they're somewhere else. And then you had doctors too. There's this really good book that says, I forgot what it's called, Oath Betrayed. And it talks about the psychologists who were sitting in on torture to help determine more effective measures to torture, which the the group of psychologists, you have like the Lawyers Guild, you have like a guild of professionals. So it's a psychologist professional group was saying that these people have to get their licenses revoked. That goes against the Hippocratic Oath, which is first, do no harm. So we not only have to hold the politicians accountable, we have to hold all the professionals accountable who should have not been a part of this torture industry. There's an industry set up to torture. It wasn't just one person. It was a culture and systemic torture. And there's these professionals who went against their professional ethics to do it. I would say definitely the politicians um, shouldn't be politicians anymore, and we need to hold them accountable in court of laws. But there's some medical professionals too, and there's some interesting books about that. So we're imagining there's a doctor, there's people doing the violence, and there's people directing them. So soften them up. That's the direct orders. Now sleeps he with insurgency who yesterday denied him thrice. I don't know, maybe that's my commentary of what's going on. That this guy is being pushed towards being a terrorist by being tortured, who probably has no intelligence value. These are facts from what I've read. Pause, wait for the detainee to catch his breath. Remember, they're not prisoners of wars. They're detainees. These people aren't freedom fighters. They're insurgents. The war for truth is on a word-by-word basis. If you call them POWs, they would have certain rights. So we call them detainees. But this is all arbitrary. They're making arbitrary judgments on how we view reality in order to frame the discussion in a way that benefits power structures. That's scary. Now when we talk about gender identity and what's a man and a woman and transsexual and this and that, you don't think this is following the same patterns of confusion? Or when we talk about, what else? I know the gender confusion seems to be like confusing nouns and making people at instinctual level feel kind of weird. I'm not saying that intersex people don't deserve rights, but is this what we should be talking about right now? Or does it fit a pattern of confusion from the top down? People can have a point and deserve their rights, but not deserve the spotlight in the cultural narrative. This is what we were talking about just 10 years ago. We were talking about torture, which would have led to American empire. We were talking about ending wars. And now we're talking about whether someone has a cooter or a dick under the skirt. One has a little bit more relevance to, we have $6 trillion for a war that's insane. That's not caused through gender body dysmorphia. That's caused through warmongering, war profiteering. So why are we talking so much about body dysmorphia? Because it has enough cultural relevance and emotional relevance to keep us distracted. Continue. Did you deny them? Yes. Now this is a captive thrice? Yes. Soften them up. And now I had to look up the definition of torture. We're not allowed to torture, so they had this soft definition. Softening them up, tightening the screws, these euphemisms that actually became legal jargon. Who created this? John, what was this? The lawyers for Bush had this cabal of lawyers who were making legal precedents for torture in order to make sure that Bush wasn't incriminated or people, the culture he was creating top down to allow enhanced interrogation techniques. We have to get him on those crimes, but then also get these legal scholars who, just like the medical professionals, abandon the ethics of their profession in order to put America on this path. In order to course correct, we're going to have to open up all of these discussions. And it's going to be a complicated, thorough discussion. I think it's within our powers to do it. Otherwise, this is how you salvage civilization. We have to go back to the foundations of what we consider our civilization to be, our rule of law, and what's that established on, sense of justice. And then we got a car behind me with a loud it's probably a cruiser motorcycle from what it sounds like it, with a very loud radio, which never made any sense to me to have a cruiser with a loud radio, but probably a Harley. We're in Harley country out here in the desert. It's good riding, good cruiser riding. Did you fight for this old country with this insurgency with your life? Soften them up. Now, who wouldn't be a freedom fighter when your country's being invaded? I have many soldiers telling me, you know what? I understand where they're coming from. If someone came into my country and acted like we did, I'd pick up a gun too. We still have to shoot them. You still have to get home safe. I understand the soldiers who say, and the commanders who say, I'm just trying to get my soldiers home safe. But that's why you don't hold them accountable. You hold the chain of command accountable who put them there in the first place. A social contract was broken between the leaders, the commanders of our troops, and the soldiers, that you do not put soldiers in harm's way without just cause. That is what was broken, and that's why people have to go to jail. Because if you don't hold people responsible for that, you undermine the whole morale of armed forces, and you undermine the. I think you undermine the justification for us even being a civilization. Do you fight for this? So who's right, who's wrong here? The guy's defending his country, but now he's being tortured for it. Was he even defending his country? Maybe this guy was just rounded up in one of those. They were supposed to raid one house on the block, but they raided the whole block instead. So now they have 90% of the people offer no intelligence value. Man Judah Gira Kunan Aber Judah Yar Judah. I'd have to look that up. I'm pretty sure that's not Iraqi. That's Iranian, the Persian Empire. I was looking up poetry, so in order to create a mature work of art, I wanted to put him saying some poetry. So I'm borrowing from Hemingway and the Western canon. I wanted to then throw in some. I know that the Arabic tradition, they salvaged a lot of. There's this great scholarly, when I read about Islam, scholarly side to Islam, how they salvaged the intellectual history of Greek society, Roman society during the Dark Ages, which was then translated to Europe. So they're the ones who translated Aristotle and all these great philosophers. So I know they had a poetic tradition, and they started to get into that. But then Iran are Caucasians, they're not really Arabs. And so although they live in the same area, there's an Arabic culture, an Arabic tradition, but then Iran is different. Iran are people who came from, I believe, the Caucasus Mountains and there. So that's just the ignorance of when we say they're all a bunch of like camel jockey, whatever pejorative you want to use. Their cultures are very distinct and different. So I'm pretty sure I was looking for Arabic poetry, but I stumbled across a famous poet from, I think, the 12 to 1400s, sometime around then. But I'm pretty sure he was Iranian, but it was beautiful. It's about, these are his words. That translates to, I weep separately, the cloud separately, the friend separately. It was something about the human experience and the individuality of experience, but then also compassion. So like how separate you are from your friends when you're in sorrow or from the world, but then also how you're connected to it. He has this poem on it. It seemed like, I read a little bit about him and I have to look it up. I don't even remember who the guy was, but I found a good source. I read enough about him that I felt like I got the meaning of what he was saying. And then I put that into the words of this guy, because only love and poetry. I guess the point of this poem is, how do we heal people? I was at that age, and I still do. That's what I'm trying to do now, is seeing so much injustice and so much, if I really think that this is a genocide going on, an American genocide, and not just Iraq, but from the Iroquois to the Iraqi, we've killed people for the lowest of human reasons, greed and resource acquisition, and objectifying other human beings to the point that you feel like their life isn't worth anything is the biggest crime probably you could commit on this earth, because human being has so much potential. To deny that potential by limiting that life for nothing more than selfish greed seems like the biggest tragedy. Every single human being is just exponentially can create miracles of invention and of joy and love, and so to destroy that, maybe destroy a couple assholes, but for the most part I think people are good. So how do you come back from that realization without losing all of your faith in humanity? And that's why I started to think, well, poetry and art, but mostly poetry is my kernel of truth. That like, this is why all cultures have a poetic tradition, because it helps us deal with our strongest emotions and our largest disasters and travesties. When you lose a family member, when you lose a child. When my uncle died in April, I wrote a poem, or I found a poem and I recited it to my family. Poetry is compact meaning, but the truths of our society and our human condition, and so those are the inspiring poems. But then also the healing powers of poetry help us in our lowest, darkest moments. And that's why I quote Robert Lowell saying, "Darkness honestly lived through is a place of wonder and life." I got that from the letters of Robert Lowell. He's an American poet laureate. So he's a heavy hitter poet, recognized culturally to be one of the best to do it. And so his letters, he went to an insane asylum for a little bit, and he talked about the darkness that he lived through and how you can find wonder and light in there, but you need to live through it honestly. So this person, putting myself in his position, if I was tortured, and what would I rely on? I'm pretty sure lines would come out, and things I've read, or spontaneous lines. And for this man, maybe he's Iraqi, but he has Iranian relatives. It's not as separate as it is now. Even though Saddam had a war against Iraq, back in Saddam's time, Shia and Sunni, there are many people who had family members who were on both sides. We've instigated a civil war to the point where we balkanized it and separated it, and this is a strategy of conquest. But there was more cross-pollination before. When you increase the pressure on society and you increase the violence, then the human traits start disappearing to the point where you get rapes and pillaging and civilization. The fabric of civilization falls apart, and now instead of investing the society with the right to violence, now every individual feels like that's their right, and then things get really crazy. That's the anarchy that is chaos. There's a definition that's a utopia where we don't need government because we're governing ourselves with different tools. But then there's the chaotic definition where we don't have government because everything's fallen to a state of cannibalism. So this guy has this poem come to his mind, or he's using it for strength or for whatever reason. He says it. They say translate because they don't know what the fuck's going on, because violence doesn't recognize the art. They're at two different sides of the spectrum. Artistic influence and violence. Artistic influence is opening someone's heart up by helping them see the other person as a beautiful miracle of creation. Violence is closing someone's heart to the point that they can see the other person as an object which can either be taken, or you take the sex, you rape the girl, you take the resources, you kill the person who happens to be standing on top of them. These are the same patterns. When we have these Me Too movements and these other movements, let's talk about violence systemically across the whole board. Or let's just make money off the corporation, right? I weep separately, the cloud separately, the friend separately. And then the cynicism, repeat after me, I do separately. It's continued. And then now we step out of that framework. In the next war, we shall interrogate the poets. Now we're not in that framework anymore, and we're just commenting on it all the way to the end of the poem. The end of the poem, we walk back to that framework. In the next war, we shall interrogate the poets. So this is, I guess, some of these things are like subconscious. I'm still wondering why I put them in there. Like, what does that mean? In the next war, we shall interrogate the poets. This is me wondering, how close up to this line can I toe? There's going to be a point at which I ask my fellow countrymen to put themselves in the shoes of their victims, and I'm going to confront a cognitive dissonance, which is like that guy in that bar who said, I could smash you in the face right now. People, instead of wanting to confront their own complicitness or their own ignoring the realities, or even just their heartbreaking, if someone actually for the first time realizes how much violence is being done in their name, that they might decide instead that I'm wrong and that I'm the threat, as opposed to, I've come to it with my folks all the time when I'm a little bit too honest about things I disagree with, Christianity or other foundational belief systems. They get really upset, and now they look for hurtful things to say in order to basically get out of an uncomfortable position. Honesty, in certain respects, when you haven't really opened that door, that's the same reason you cry on psychedelics, is your brain, now you have less control over it. Some doors open that you didn't expect to be open, or you forgot, or you didn't know that there was trauma behind that door, and it's overwhelming. So interrogate the poets. That's what it is. They don't really understand poetry, and will it be seen as a threat in the next war? Is there such a thing as cultural treason? Because if there is, I probably want to walk. That's maybe the point of my life, to walk right up to that line, even cross that line. How much can I empathize with our victims before people call me a traitor? Because there's only two. I'm trying to empathize with victims in order to heal our society and stop the cycle of violence. But I could already see it coming. It's pretty obvious that people are going to say that I'm supporting the enemy. And then what? How much of a slippery slope is it until people justify violence against me? And that's why you have to be confident. Because once people threaten you with violence or justify it against you, what's your response? If you're not someone who ducks their head, well, I have a right to defend myself, right? And that's going to be a discussion. So if you vilify an artist to the point that you endanger their life, what is that artist, what response is within their moral realm of possibilities? How much can an artist defend themselves against vilification if the vilification and the slander, like Donald Trump goes out and slanders people to the point that he actually might endanger some people's lives? What is their moral response to that? Do they have a right now to defend themselves against Donald Trump? Or it'll be an interesting discussion. It's a reason why you shouldn't slander and vilify people to that point. but you can't just let them push you around. So the Quran shall become packaged in every MRE, cultural sensitivity. You don't need to repeat this, it's in your SOP. SOP stands for Standard Operating Procedure, military term. Today, no one tortures because transparency is of the utmost importance. This is being sarcastic. Softening alone is retained. These are legal terms actually written into the justification for torture. Tightening screws. I think I looked up this definition. It means that which one must suffer without any permanent or profound psychological damage. So that's what you're allowed to do, that as long as they can prove that there's no permanent or profound psychological damage. Those of us who return talk very slowly, and we look at each other with infinite love and poetry. So now this is so the author, apparently someone who suffered this, came out looking into his heart. So this perspective is someone who suffered this, trying to look at the Americans and trying to speak to them. So this is someone who's trying to ask the Americans, put yourself in our position. If you were tortured, if people came in your country and did this to you, and he's defending the fact that he has no love for Americans anymore. This is my culture, so I don't think I'll ever lose my love for Americans or my culture, because my bias is such that I grew up here and these are the people I know best. No matter how much I try to put myself in other people's shoes, this is going to be my home. But this person isn't me. This person is the narrator of the poem who has lost his love for us, and he's trying to explain why. And this narrator has such a love for poetry that it's really hard for him to explain how he, through torture, has lost his, basically a part of his faith in humanity. He's become the victim who now objectifies his oppressor. And I don't know if this writer can come to forgiveness. And this is me trying to understand our cycles that we've started of violence in the Middle East. There's going to be people like this. There's going to be people who can't forgive us for what we've done. And that's just accepting the responsibility of our actions. To think any less is to not be mature. There's some rape victims who can't forgive their rapists. Some people can. Some families of murdered children can go and forgive them and say, we don't want this guy to commit the death penalty or to be killed in the death penalty because we don't think you should kill the killer and this and that. But some can't. And can you blame them? Can you blame people who are overwhelmed by their suffering to the point that they don't have forgiveness in their heart? I believe that that's the highest standard of human morality and how we are, but there's so many things that go into who a person is. You don't blame them for not. We don't want them to be the lowest, and we don't want them to take justice into their own hands. But to ask someone to forgive after they've received such levels of atrocity, some people can, and we want people to, hopefully, we want to give them as many tools as possible to heal. But if they don't have complete healing, that's just accepting people for being human. That's just human. I'm sure there's things that could happen to me that I won't be able to forgive. I try, and that's why I work really hard at being peaceful and calm, because I know that within me there's some very strong, this Irish temper I see in my dad, and sometimes my ego gets up a lot, where I have some self-destructive abilities and some strong passions which can get out of control, I'm sure. And so that's why I keep an eye on them. This comes after prolonged detention. It's one of the final symptoms, him losing his humanity and love for people. There's been irritation, anger, fear, doubt, confessions, denials, misrepresentations, mistakes, cowardice, inability, and lack of talent for drowning. All of these emotions going through when you're being tortured. What do you think's going through? There's cowardice. There's other stuff too. Just because someone doesn't break doesn't mean someone's not afraid. Oh, I wrote something earlier today that said, just as the coward may view the brave as reckless, the brave has the right to view the sensible as cowardice. We all have a right to our perspectives. So, one man's bravery is another man's recklessness. One man's sensibility is another man's cowardice. All of this has been and will be again to be counterbalanced by firmness, steadiness, courage, honor of family, and the ability to both resist and to fight. We know human nature. When we do this to Iraq, we know there's going to be an insurgency. There's going to be people who defend their honor and their country. And to blame them for doing so is just being ignorant and lying about human nature. We don't have justice on our side. We don't have the truth on our side. We don't have honor on our side. And this is something that really bugs me back then and now, that contract that's broken between soldiers, putting them in harm's way without just cause. Now you're giving them a dishonorable war to fight, which hurts everyone at their core who's trying to be an honorable person. I think that's where the suicides are coming from in our armed forces, is when you enlist honorable men to commit dishonorable acts, you're destroying the very core of their identity, them thinking that they're a good person. An honorable, all I'm trying to be in life is be a good person. Everything else comes after that. That brings me the love in my life, that brings me the good woman, that brings me the money. When people do business with me, they feel like I'm a broker with integrity. When women, they notice that they have this sensibility where they're able to tell good men from bad, usually the ones who aren't too confused. That's my saving grace, even though sometimes I'm goofy or I don't fit the social mold. But people notice I'm a good person. When you take that person and make them, enlist them into a campaign which has no honor in it, that's really fucked up. That can be corrected, but that's what we're trying to correct. We need to hold those people accountable and bring them to justice, because they've not only attacked the honor of Iraq by invading it without cause because Iraq posed us no threat, they've attacked the honor of every family, of every service member they enlisted in that cause when they fooled us to go into this war of aggression. Because these people were just trying to be honorable. A lot of them were. I think most of the enlisted servicemen are trying to do the honorable thing. And that's a crime against humanity, is to enlist honorable people to commit dishonorable acts. So only love and poetry is how this guy's trying to heal. How to endure and love and poetry, repeated, only love and poetry for Americans too. And he talks about that poem about separateness. No, then it's not love. So this is a counterbalance. This is an argument. Well, if you can't forgive the Americans for what they did to you, then how can you talk about love and poetry? How can you be an artist? How can you? So I guess this guy's a poet. This is why I'm asking myself, if I was over there, would I be able to, if, I wonder about that. If I was a military serviceman committing those acts, would I retain my artistic sensibility? I guess this is me. If I had to sit back, I'd be, what do I value most about myself is my sensitivity. What have I protected most in my whole life is my sensitivity to life. I could say artistic sensibility, but there's no difference between artistic sensibility or artistic sensitivity and human sensitivity. The artist describes these human emotions, the human condition. So all my life, I could have been with a prostitute in Mexico. I'm like, you know what, I don't want to cross that bridge and introduce that into my life. I could have gone and been an infantryman. My friend was like, go to Iraq, we're going to have fun together. He went to be a Cav Scout. I was like, I just don't feel it. I don't feel like following this George Bush Jr. as my top commander. Everything just reeked. It was all just, and then afterwards I started reading history and I started to realize just how much it actually was dirty. I didn't read history until after I got out of the military and realized just how dirty America was. I had a hint of it from a little bit of history I read. We all know we're a little bit hypocritical, but when you actually get into what the cabal of lawyers who created the CIA are doing and the profit incentive from the very beginning of our empire and wars of aggression, and you read Smedley Butler. Smedley Butler is a Marine general who said, I'm tired of killing for American corporations. Within a couple years of his campaign to get his word out, he was dead of cancer. But how can you write that here? Yeah, so now we're wondering about this Iraqi. How can you be an artist after suffering that? I guess that's my question. That's the subconscious question I was mulling over in my head was, okay, if I was over there and if I had suffered those tragedies, would I be joining the insurgency? Would I still be trying to purify the world through art? Would I have the strength of conviction to sit back as an Iraqi and try to write these poems and try to write this? Because I could do it now as an American, say, all right, the war sucks and we need justice in the world. I'm going to create these pieces of art in order to help open up people's heart. But over there, would I suffer so much just to be like, no, there's some things you can't come back from. And so we talk about that. Not that we wish any ill, nor we want any greater, but when submerged in that undiscovered country from whose stream no traveler returns who hasn't been there. I think that's a phrase from Hemingway. But that's basically when we're submerged in death, the land of death. We walk away from this cannot stay, and in us die this inner knowing that grows, manured by death. Love and poetry, not for you. No, I'm sorry. So he's lost a part of his humanity through what he's been through. And this, we have a whole generation of people. How many people have been through what he's been through? Millions? Hundreds of thousands? 2003 we invaded. So if someone was born in 2000, they're 18 now. All they've known is war and violence and bloodshed. This is how ISIS is created. This is how generations of terrorism is created. This guy right here is a terrorist who was created. Not a terrorist. I don't think he becomes a terrorist. I just think that his heart is closed and he was an artist. I don't think this guy was violent. I think he was picked up as one of like the 80-90% who had no intelligence value. And this showed him the face of America. And since then he's scarred. This is the type of guy who supports terrorism. He's too smart to do terrorism himself. But he's the type of guy who, because of what he's seen, he sees the line drawn in the sand, and he's not on our side. He's on the other side because of the face of our violence. And that is the consequence of the actions of the highest in our command all the way up to the president. And that's this poem, that's why I love it so much, is the kernel of truth of why terrorism has increased since we invaded Iraq, which is objective measures. George Bush's war on terrorism was the seeding of terrorism, and we've only had more terrorism since. Again, that's the main reason. Social contract broken between the soldiers is why we should prosecute him for war crimes, but also endangering America on the macro level. His actions and the actions of everyone in his cabinet and everyone who's trying to defend his cabinet or paper over it, like the Obama administration, creates more terrorism in the world and makes America less safe. And if their actions are making our country less safe, they have to be held accountable. Or else what the fuck are we doing? Do you care about the safety of our country? Because if you do, this is how we make it safer. By stopping people endangering it. The threat, the military were sworn to protect our country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Domestically, there's these people who are making our country less and less safe. This has to be addressed. The pattern's not ending. It's if we don't address it, then the people who come after him just further propagate this pattern. There's an occupational fucking invading army. That's where his emotions coming out. Only love, now he's back down. Only love and poetry. And then he comes and he tries to explain it to you the best he can as a poet. He says, reach out to your love's dark sister hate. I think Hemingway used the same metaphor. Hate, the sister of love. His was a lot. His were like a poem writing to his girlfriend or something. It was really trite and stupid. So like I felt like I definitely have more important stuff to say in mine. So I borrowed some of his language. Walk her into the bowels of Abu Ghraib. So that was one of the biggest injustices I saw at the time, that Abu Ghraib was being turned just like Guantanamo into terrorism creating factories. Most of the people you're imprisoning have no intelligence value. Now you're just torturing them, letting them go. Let their story spread. Everyone you torture is, 20 people they're talking to, or family members who are waiting outside. See if love is waiting in the dark, or who's waiting there instead. What do people rely on when they're being destroyed completely, their humanity and their bodies physically? Do they just turn the other cheek like Jesus and say, oh, okay, well, this has opened up my heart for love? And then who's waiting there instead? Or do they just start really fucking hating? Like if you don't break the person, you just harden them. And so for every however many you break, however many you just harden, and they say, if I fucking get that. I think that's also, I was looking at what my character would be if I was in that position, really trying to put myself in their shoes. This stuff was really a mind fuck. When I was sitting there reading this and I was like trying to put myself in these poems, like how I feel right now, you really like stop for a minute and you think, like, what would I do if I was waterboarded in a country where people invaded? And really, not just words, but put yourself in their shoes, like a real thought experiment. Really imagine if you're an Iraqi being tortured. My land is a target of opportunity, and now you're torturing me, and I'm someone who can't be broken. I'll die for my conviction. There's many people like that. I feel like I'm one. What is death? I'm going to go back to what I was before I was born. Oh shit, I'm going to sleep and I'm not waking up. If you grasp life too tightly, you don't get any of the fruits. You have to be willing to risk it all for certain things. If you don't have anything you're willing to die for, I don't think you've really learned how to live. You have to have beliefs that are above your own personal safety. If you want the highest rewards in life, the best loves, and if you want to just walk with no fear. Fucking life's too short to fear bullshit. And there's certain things you should fear and there's certain things you shouldn't. So that person who is willing to die for their conviction and they're being tortured, It's like, all right, what are you doing here? You're creating a person who's never going to forgive you. Loves lightly, blah, blah, blah. All the cells so neatly filled, the communication clear and good, where loves is often quite unintelligible. So the communication of violence is very simple. Love, we're not sure if she loves me, whispered lightly in a hurry as she smiles, giving unimportance to the words. This is like a contrast. And then there within the cage, in the language of violence, do we find love? No, she's long gone. She never stands for interviews. You don't interrogate love. This is just comparing the two different philosophies of values, the interrogation and the how you don't. I guess this is also, you don't convince people through violence. We know that on a personal level. You harden people and you create stronger resistance, because this is, in honor societies, violence doesn't break a man. Violence just adds to the debt you have to pay back. Love is how you. This is what Martin Luther King did with the. You don't murder hate. You don't. What is it? Darkness cannot put out darkness. We'll come to that later on. I got that King speech. But this is just human nature, the laws of human nature that we all know. That this is just perpetuating a cycle of violence. And this is what we do when we bring George Bush Jr. on war crimes, is we point out that this was on purpose. They began a kernel of violence that they knew would spread and propagate. And I don't think it's ignorance. I think it's maliciousness. They started these wars in order to propagate more violence in the Middle East. They purposefully created a culture of interrogation and torture in order to spread more and more hate and foment not just civil war in Iraq, but foment ISIS, foment a reason for us to stay there occupying this territory, endangering service members, also impugning their honor, and then causing more terrorism in the world, which justifies the military-industrial complex. The profit motive's there, and that's all you need in life, a profit motive. You don't need a conspiracy when common interests converge. That's the George Carlin quote. You do not need a conspiracy when common interests converge, and the common interest is for us to have perpetual war. So all of this just fits the common interest, to go and propagate cycles of violence. And the interrogation and torture is a part of that pattern. It's not isolated incidents because someone was watching Jack Bauer on 24, which is what was their defense. And then I said, one finds fastened on the chair of the office in a newly licensed dentist. That was, there was these torture interrogation rooms that they were discovering in like abandoned schools and in like dentist offices, and like this is the journalism, the one stuff that came out. They had, remember, in this war we have less information than any other war coming out. So we have no idea what the fuck's going on. But from what we did get out, they were finding interrogation torture rooms with evidence of torture. And then also, who knows what the CIA was doing, funding these, doing it, some of them themselves, subcontracting. And now we're walking you, putting your feet in their shoes, to the torture room. The beginning was the torture, but now we go to the end and we're walking us towards that beginning scene. Make your feet go slowly where they know better than to take you. We know what's going to happen. Feet are wary, but the feet are calm. Feet of the Prophet, feet of Saddam, your belief systems, your old leader, your nationality, your identity, no matter how much you hated Saddam. He was an Iraqi governing Iraqis. There was a quote that one of the Iraqis, when we invaded, they said, "Oh, the master has withdrawn his dog and he's come himself." People knew Saddam was an asshole, but he was an Iraqi dog, and now the master's come himself. Lead you ahead where things are said, towards a place you'll be wet. It's just water. Now sleeps he with insurgency, who yesterday denied him thrice. This is how you propagate cycles of violence. If you know, you will pay the price. If you do not, you will. It doesn't matter what you know or what you don't know. When we're done, you're a terrorist, whether you wanted to be one or not. I remember in my mind at this time, I remember specifically, I just remembered it right now, a specific image of like, if you tell someone you're a terrorist, they're like, no, I'm not. You're like, you're a terrorist. They're like, no, I'm not. You say that enough, they're going to become a terrorist. You're a fucking terrorist. You keep framing the narrative. You're a fucking terrorist. You're a terrorist. You're a terrorist. We go over there and we fucking propagate violence on violence. You're a terrorist. You're a terrorist. Well, guess what? Now we have ISIS. Now I have actual terrorists. This is when Trump says Obama created ISIS and George Bush created 9/11, or he invited it. He's not completely wrong, but they allow the fool to say the most outlandish stuff because he's so foolish that He's not even making the case for it. He's just saying shit. But it's triggering us and resonating within us because no one else is saying this stuff. Because no one else is having a deep discussion. He's not having a deep discussion. He's just trafficking in emotional triggers. But it's interesting that it works so well. The other will, older than the will of Abraham, tying into the religion. Long, ugly will, the deep foundations of identity that you'll rely on, I'd imagine, if you're being tortured. All the nights, the deserts of our heart, coming forth like an oasis. Where is he coming up? How does he survive something like this? In this barren cell, wishing to proceed, you wish me no ill will, my true friend, while you expend that which is not expendable. So now, this is me describing how you basically took away if I was this guy, like, how we took away his identity, how we impugned upon his humanity. What was the crime against humanity? How do you define that in individual terms of torturing an individual person, a poet, a romantic individual who had no intelligence value at all? But the violence is pushing him to sympathize with the terrorists, with nothing more than harassing water, nothing more than that. All of my land is a target of opportunity. He says, I see why you're here. I see the natural resources. I see you securing the oil fields instead of securing the museums with our cultural artifacts. You secure what is valuable to you as opposed to what is our identity as one of the oldest, if not the oldest culture in the world, which that stuff ends up being bought by Hobby Lobby. Stuff like that is ending up back in your country. This isn't imperialism. These are the same patterns as Britain going to Greece and then stealing artifacts from ancient civilization, bringing it back into a British museum. The crown jewels, where did these come from? All my land is a target of opportunity. All of us have been interned. If you look at Baghdad now with these blast walls everywhere, you've separated the country. Over half the middle class has fled. Who knows how? These are numbers I got from 2008 to 10. Who knows how worse it is now? And from this cell, single occupied, this poet is trying to explain how this cycle of violence is going to propagate. You can kill me, and you can interrogate me, and you can force me to give whatever false info I need to do in order to save my life, and just agree with you and get on and let you excise your hatred and whatever propaganda dogma that you have to get out because you were told that I'm not worthy of humanity. And so part of your identity now is to torture and make people like me suffer because of the lies and the hate that you've been bred on. But let me just tell you that from here, this one isolated incident, further cells are heard. And that's not just because they're interrogating this guy. Next, there's another cell where they're being interrogated, which you can imagine. And they're all screaming and they're all being tortured and you can just, how much violence is going on when you have a whole block of houses that they raided when they only had one of intelligence value, or when they have 8 or 9 out of every 10 which shouldn't have been held at all, and how many of those guys are tortured. But many further cells are also those terrorist cells. That's how terrorism propagates, where they don't have to really communicate with each other, because they all, on a visceral level of identity, are feeling like their honor and their humanity is being robbed from them. And so there's a response, and that's just human nature. And if you don't understand that human nature, you can't profess to understand the art of war, because the art of war is based off of human psychology. And yeah, there's a lot in here, which it's compact, and it gets to the heart of the injustice of the war, the crimes against humanity, the crimes against art, against people's ability to love, so people's ability to create good art, cycles of violence. And hopefully it allows people to heal by, on our side, putting us in the position of the people who we're inflicting violence against, or against whom violence is being inflicted in our name. And on their side, maybe they can, the fact that people on our side are trying to understand that maybe lowers this level of violence and de-escalates. But I haven't let any Iraqis see this. I haven't let any of this poetry out. So I'm wondering, I don't know how it would be received, but it helped heal me. And it helped me, this is my little breadcrumb of perspective, which I feel without it, I lose a little bit more of my humanity. So this is a reservoir of humanity for me. And in that sense, I can't read it enough, and I like the way it makes me feel. I think it's complete. It's the values in this are human values, and so it has some worth.